Hey, this is The Hard Truth with Tony Schaefer, powered by Sig Sauer, Never Settle. I've carried a lot of weapons in my life. The ones I choose to carry are the ones which are the best, and those are Sig Sauer. I've always got one, literally within arm's length, and I carried them in combat, and I would only want to carry what I wanted to carry in the combat, which was something that worked, and Sig always worked amazingly well, and it's always my choice, never settle. And we are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud Podcast Network. Check us out at Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.net, London Center at londoncenter.org, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, and our website, projectsentinel.net. Bumper music by my dear friend Cherie Curry, rock and roll legend, who gave us the Rock and Roll Oblivion, which is what we use as our intro and outro music. Thank you, Cherie. And without further ado, our guest today is David Horowitz. David of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. David has written a book, The Final Battle, which talks about the next election could be the last. And we'll go through that today in great detail. David, as I mentioned before in our pre-interview, I'm a big fan. I spent a lot of time going through and learning about everything you've said. And the clarity of your message and the facts that you portray as the foundation of your thinking is important. It's critical. And I'm just curious, when I look at the language being used in the media, the media seems to use language which, is probably grammatically correct. I mean, when you read a report in USA Today or see someone on CBS, the language is probably, it's correct in that the form of verbs and nouns are correct, but the basic content is all badly skewed to the left. Essentially, so much of the content we see in mainstream media is essentially propaganda. Would you agree with my premise and thought on that?
And the left is, and let's not mince words, it's the Democratic Party, which the left spent 50 years infiltrating and taking over. And did so with the election of one of their own, Barack Obama, to the presidency. But let's not mince words about this left.
It's not.
It's anti-American. It's anti-constitution. It hates the Constitution.
Right.
It hates white people. It's racist. And it's criminal. And you rarely hear those words come out of Republican mouths, and that's the biggest problem that we have. That people sanitize their language. If you just look at the classified documents that Joe Biden sprinkled all over entities that the Chinese communists, he had already invited the Chinese communists into. The proper way to talk about the Bidens is that the Bidens made themselves rich beyond their wildest dreams by taking bribes from foreign powers, especially our worst enemies like China and Russia. That's the reality. We have a traitor in the White House. Everybody stumbles over that one. The furthest they'll go is to ask whether he's compromised. Give me a break. I mean, it's just obvious. You don't take in $20-30 million for nothing.
Right.
The Chinese aren't dumping money on you for not doing it. And if you look at his foreign policy, I mean, it's appeasement
right.
of a vicious enemy.
Right.
Including efforts to cover up the fact that China, let me say, I came out of the communist movement, not that I was ever a member of the party, my parents were, but I had that outlook that the Chinese communists, I mean, how shall I put this? My image of the communist Chinese is they sent their military up 10,000-foot mountains in Tibet to destroy monasteries that were 1,000 years old. That's how hateful they are. And here we have our government, the Center for Disease Control and Fauci in particular, funding the creation of a biological weapon
Right.
lab controlled by the Chinese military and the Chinese Communist Party. This is treason at the highest level. And part of our problem today is that where it's very obvious to people who don't have ideological blinders that the left has.
Right.
Who's saying it? And people talk to each other maybe, but they're not saying it in public.
Well, that's part of what I want to cover, because the public discussion is something that's been suppressed.
Let me just add to that.
Yeah.
You think the Democrat Party would have any compunction about calling Republicans traitors? They already do.
They do.
Insurrectionists, traitors.
Well, that's the thing.
Racists. The Democrat Party lives on racism.
Right. And look, I always.
In the midst of a banking crisis.
Yeah.
A bank in Silicon Valley gave $5 billion to some climate slush fund that's questionable, who did anything. They gave $73 million to the Black Lives Matter criminal organization that tore up our cities and killed scores of people and got the police defunded.
Right.
That's why one of the reasons they went broke. That plus the inflation that Biden has caused by spending our money, people's money, while he's raking in millions from our enemies.
Right.
That's the state of our country.
No, there's no doubt. And I agree with you. And I think, let me help illustrate that. Regarding China, the Chinese issue, 3 years ago in 2020, David, I was actually at CPAC, and I did an interview with Epoch Times, and I said my assessment of the situation then in March of 2020, right at the time of the beginning of the pandemic. I said we would come to find that the Chinese probably had a weaponized biological weapons program, a program that they actually control, that there's no such thing as private research in China, because there's not. The Chinese government controls everything, and that we would come to find that this was probably done in some form deliberately. And that interview was promptly edited to the point it was just taken down. As a matter of fact, I don't think you can find it now, but I'm an intelligence officer with over 30 and a half years of work. I've done assessments of similar things, and yet somehow my professional opinion was dangerous. And again,
the administration is a fascist administration.
Yeah.
The kind of censorship you see, the kind of intimidation of ordinary citizens for nothing,
right,
is just very familiar from China, Russia, and Nazi Germany.
Right. And so
you could have a racial scapegoat, like the Nazis had the Jews. The Jews actually didn't have the resources to fight back the way white people will in this country when they get, it's beginning to happen.
Little by little. And but you talked about before the fact that so much of this starts at the university level, that the left.
Universities are the source of crisis.
Right.
All the apparatchiks in the Democrat Party were indoctrinated by Marxists in the university and taught to hate their country.
Mm-hmm.
If we could just take slavery for a moment here, they're talking about reparations. $5 million a head in California, going to steal from everybody and give black people because of their skin color. If you want reparations, sue the Confederacy.
Yes.
You don't sue the government that sacrificed 360,000 mainly white lives to free the slaves and spent God knows how much money in national treasure to support its troops.
And California was never a Confederate state.
And slavery.
Yeah.
Here's what I found.
For 70 years. Almost every slave that shipped to the United States was enslaved by black Africans in Africa and sold at slave auctions.
Right.
It's only because white Christian males, led by Wilberforce and Thomas Jefferson insisted that all men are created equal and have a God-given right to liberty, that Black people are free.
Right.
Every Black in America owes their freedoms and their well-being. They're the richest Black community in the world, including all of Africa and the Black West Indies. So the world is so upside down, and the Democrat Party is the carrier of this racist bias, whose true aim is to destroy respect for the Constitution and all the laws and principles it established that made this country great. We are in an existential fight for our lives, and the existential threat is the Democratic Party.
So
That's
I want to
what
go through. Yeah, no, I want to help illustrate that with some of the other examples regarding Obama and some of the speeches. Now, as the audience knows, I've got an actual degree in environmental studies from Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, back in '86. I know from the inside that the green movement is simply an extension of the Marxist concepts, because they've taken the science that should be basic, and understanding that plastics are damaging the environment, that you don't want to do strip mining because it destroys the environment. But the whole green energy movement has become essentially a religion that they use to drive all of their goodness. And ultimately, they're seeking a utopian state where everybody's equal. There's no crime, there's no nothing, and having the opposite effect. Is that kind of where they want to go?
It's all about them feeling virtuous while they're incredibly destructive.
Yes.
Incredibly destructive. And the reason they're destructive is because if you disagree with their conclusions, you can't engage them in a reasonable discussion, because they're going to call you names and shut you down.
So that's one of the points I wanted to bring up, is because President Obama, had used some interesting language which helps illustrate your point. One of the things he always talked about is fair. Is this fair or fairness? You know what? And so he always talked about a fairer world. David, what does that even mean? I mean, it's like, how do you...
Obama's lips, it doesn't mean anything.
But people listen to him, and that's the thing. Is like, what is that?
Well, yeah, there's a sucker born every minute, I believe. Famous American statement.
And another phrase he used in his speech was, "We are seeking a, quote, more generous world," unquote. What does that mean? What does it mean, a more generous world? I mean, I can't even put my mind around that.
It means you can defame people who are incredibly successful and creative, like Elon Musk, because the result of his creativity and genius is that he has a lot of money.
Right.
That's what it means.
Well, and then of course they go, anytime that the rules or laws are against them, they complain that the norms are being violated or their values are being violated. David, I don't know of anybody who has less values than people on the left, and yet they use this somehow.
Or more contempt for norms.
Yeah, and I don't get how they get away with it. And I guess that's
criminals.
Well, that's my next point.
We could spend an hour just going over all the criminal things that Biden has done.
Right. Well, this we can talk about some of that.
He lies about everything.
Right. And he gets away with it. Nobody seems to call him out.
He gets away with it because they're all in the same ideological closet, where they don't break ranks. Look, there's a war going on. Unfortunately, conservatives are just beginning to get engaged in it. But the left has been at war since its creation in the 19th century.
Right.
If you are a leftist, you're a radical. You don't believe in the laws.
Right.
It's very hard for conservative people to understand this. But there's nobody who is woke, nobody who's a progressive, who has any respect for the law.
Right.
They're out to change the laws, and they're out to do it by illegal means. If they were about changing the law by legal means, they wouldn't be radicals. They would be reformers.
Right.
But their self-image is that of people who have contempt for the foundations of our culture and our legal system and our laws.
Well,
and that's why they're so dangerous.
Right.
They'll do anything.
Well, that's
they destroyed our borders unconstitutionally and illegally.
Right.
They put a woman on the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's a critical race theorist, which means that she thinks that the Constitution is a white supremacist document, even though it doesn't use the words. The words white and black don't appear in the Constitution. And America was not a racist country. If it were, there wouldn't have been 500,000 free blacks
right
on the eve of the Civil War. America is responsible for the freedom of every black citizen in this country who's descended from slaves. And a show of gratitude is necessary for that. Instead, they're suing not the Confederacy, which enslaved blacks, but they're suing the government, the federal government, which sacrificed 360,000 mainly white lives, not all, but mainly white lives, to free the slaves.
Right.
It's such a travesty. Only, patriots don't have the microphones yet. We don't have the platform.
Well, I was going to say, in addition to that, in California and in San Francisco, where they're doing this, San Francisco and California were never a Confederate state, so it's even more ironic.
There's never slavery there.
Yeah, I know.
There wasn't slavery in Virginia in 1619, like the New York Times says.
Right.
Those were indentured servants.
Right. So, and my example, obviously, which I like going back to because I have a degree in environmental studies, they're using this green movement, the bastardization of science, to benefit countries which are out to destroy us. And you and I both know, David, that China is not going to abide by any climate agreements. Biden has been touting this whole thing. The entire Inflation Reduction Act was a Trojan horse to get all this Green New Deal Marxist stuff into the economy, where you're now spending money to basically devalue our economic system, basically doing things to reduce the value of the dollar, and then finding ways to control and limit energy, which limits our economic growth and giving advantage to our enemies.
Radicals who are destroyers.
Right.
I mean, the first task is to destroy the existing society.
Right.
They need apocalyptic scenarios.
Exactly.
Rosa Luxemburg had a famous, she was a leftist, Marxist, famous saying in the 1920s, socialism or barbarism. They always made it an alternative between communism and fascism, or those same system. So if it's the end of the planet, or listen to us, the basic thing is people on the left can't handle a discussion about the facts.
Right.
So they need big labels that demonize their opponents to shut them down. That's all they do.
So, to David, to that point, we're getting close to. I really want to emphasize the book. What do we do? Because at this point, I speak out, you speak out. A lot of folks are seeing what's going on. How do we get people to wake up?
I will say, I think that Donald Trump has done the greatest service to this country and to the patriotic cause by creating the first mass conservative movement in the history of the country. There must be millions of people who've attended his rallies and follow him. And when I came into the right over 40 years ago, first thing I did was look around and I said, where's the ground army? All my ex-comrades on the left had organizations, all these issue organizations, which they used to harass bank presidents, CEOs of corporations, politicians, philanthropic executives, and intimidate them into adopting leftist views of things.
Right.
By intimidation, I mean, Sharpton Jesse Jackson made fortunes in extorting from companies by a threat. If you don't put $4 million in our pockets, we're going to boycott you and call you racist.
Right. That's
how the country was transformed, with these kind of tactics. That all the leftist organizations do it. I spoke at ALEC, which is I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's an organization of elected officials, bipartisan, over 20, 30 years old. Mm-hmm. And I was invited to speak there, and I outraged the left, a Democratic state representative.
So, David, you were just telling us about the Donald Trump effort and how important it is for his
by creating a ground army.
Right, right.
He has created a force that's able to confront them when they steal elections, when they get postal workers to stuff ballot boxes. Trump supporters, who are obviously the Trump organization, I assume, has done its homework and got lists of people and can contact them. Those millions of people can go out and monitor the election sites. It's just one example.
Yeah.
And they can put pressure on politicians to counteract the pressure the left is putting on them. And I think that's one incredibly positive development. The second is the revolt of parents in the schools.
Yeah.
If you had asked me, as I was brought up by card-carrying communists, if you had asked me in the 60s how I would describe my politics, I would have said I was a Marxist revolutionary. But if the left had tried anything as Nazi-like as these experiments on prepubescent and pubescent children to alter their sexual identities and their bodies for life, to do permanent damage to them,
it's pure evil.
I would have revolted against that. I would never have endorsed that. So the left has steadily degenerated over time, is what's happened.
But I think it's an effort to undermine the very social constructs and strength that we had as a nation, David. I think that's what they're working to do, and they're amazing.
Well, I have to tell you, these people are delusional.
Yes,
they think they're changing the world. You know, the Russians were creating a new man and a new woman because socialism is so contrary to human character. It inevitably leads to a totalitarian state. I have a motto on my website. It says, inside every progressive is a totalitarian screaming to get out. Well, they even want to control your pronouns.
No doubt.
They think they're actually creating new beings, and it gives them, in a perverse way, the solace of a religion, that they're present at the creation of the world. It gives their lives meaning. And that's why you can't detach them from the left for that reason. And because all their friends will. I lost every single friend that I had when I was 35 because I voted for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
I mean, literally every single one.
Wow. So, well, clearly we have our work. And by the way, my pronouns are apocalypse now, just if anybody's curious. So I think that's a good way of approaching it. So we've been talking today with David Horowitz. His book, Final Battle, The Next Election Could Be the Last. David, that's available on Amazon and where books are sold.
Costco.
And what's that? Oh, Costco. Yeah, I like Costco. I go there myself.
It's just not available in little bookstores that the left owns.
Well, that's books too. So So, but I appreciate your time and sharing this with us. I'd like to have you back to talk in more detail about China and the environmental movement, because David, I think that's the other area which the American public have been completely buffaloed. Even our side. I mean, I know Republicans who
the Chinese,
climate change is still real.
They sealed buildings.
It's insane.
5 million people. That's families.
No, I know.
They think nothing of murdering 25 million people.
No. So anyway, so that's all we've got today at the first half of the show. David, again, I'd like to have you come back, David Horowitz, and we'll have you back sometime soon. So that's it for the first.
January 6th too.
We'll talk about that too. Yeah, more coming on that soon. So anyway, everybody stand by. Again, this is the Hard Truth of Tony Shaffer, brought to you, powered by 6 Hour on the America Out Loud Radio Network. We'll be back for part 2 of our broadcast very soon. Hey, welcome back to the Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer, powered by 6 Hour. Never settle. And I do mean that. I always have a SIG within arm's length, and I'm not joking. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I carried what worked, and SIG always worked very well for me. So here we are. And also, we are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on America Out Loud Podcast Network. And we are Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.net. Project Sentinel is our new think tank that focuses on constitutional issues relating to both freedom and national security. LondonCenter.org. London Center for Policy Research is the organization we use and do hardcore policy for those folks who like hardcore policy, which there are people like that out there. God bless them. And then, of course, we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, and, of course, all the other social media outlets to include our own websites, which I've mentioned. So here we are right now, part 2 of the show. We're just wrapping up and discussing the final battle. The next election could be the last by David Horowitz. And then we're going to have our intrepid panel come in and talk about the interview. First off, first time on the show is Jay Homnick. Jay is a senior fellow with the London Center for Policy Research, Project Sentinel. I don't know even what we call people of Project Sentinel yet, but we'll figure it out as we go. And Elizabeth Breckenkamp, ever vivacious, not as vivacious as Chris, but she's vivacious.
I'm trying.
She's working on it. And then, of course, Chris, the effervescent Chris Cordani, back from his latest extension of working the 80s. I think he's like the doctor in Back to the Future, right? I think you got your own little
DeLorean
car, your own little time travel car.
That's right. Unless you're actually
your own DeLorean that you travel back and forth from the 80s in.
Exactly. Unless you're referring to me as really being Jim Ignatowski. And in that case, that might be a little rough.
Oh,
no, I think of I can't remember what name he played in Star Trek.
Doc Brown. Oh, that's right. I was thinking Doc Brown.
No, he played that really evil Klingon that killed.
Yes,
son.
That's right.
Right, and
you're the Star Trek guy.
That's right. That's right. I think that was the Star Trek 3, the search for Spock, where Jim Ignatowski became a Klingon, and I'd like to figure out how that happened. I don't know how they do that, but that's pretty impressive.
Well, the 80s,
huh?
The 80s was a time in politics where all kinds of old characters long forgotten, like a fellow named Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden.
Isn't 1988 presidential candidate, right? There we go.
And he was caught using other people's material. An honest man like him, it was really
and he stole someone else's hair plugs too, and had them plugged in his head. I remember that.
This time he figured out the solution was just not the campaign. So what the heck? Yeah. You don't need material.
Well, let's start with President Biden, because I think it's a good place. So one of the things that David Horowitz did correctly bring up is that lying Biden is always lying, and that's a true statement, by the way. That is true. So why is it, Jay? Let's start with you, since you're the first. This is your first appearance. Why is it the media doesn't pay attention to anything Biden says when he lies?
Well, at this point in time, that's not a question anymore. About 10 years ago, that might have been a question. At this point in time, the media is mostly lying about everything.
Well,
so you can't really expect them to be horrified to hear that somebody's lying. And that's a very unfortunate fact. But if you watch Matt Taibbi and the other fellow in front of Congress last week, which they're left-wingers, but they're real honest journalists, like the last few of the dying breed.
I did watch those hearings.
And the hardcore leftist Congress people are ranking them out, because they're too honest.
Well, doesn't that illustrate what David is saying then? Basically, he's saying that the entire Democrat Party has become fascists. And at the demonstration of Matt Taibbi and the questioning, the Congress members are going after, they're using personal attacks, not factual inquiry. And they're basically trying to say, as long as speech is suppressed and it benefits us, we don't care. Is that accurate from what you saw?
Absolutely. No question about it. That's exactly what we saw. And I'll take it a step further.
Yeah.
They actually are willing to celebrate false reporting if it's on their side, whereas they will condemn true reporting if it's on the other side.
Exactly.
Well, so yeah, Elizabeth. So what? How do you? You're a member of you're a retired member of the Army, and you've done a lot of media stuff. So how do you then think that we should deal with a media that is basically inflaming the public by not being truthful? That basically, I would argue that they not only do a disservice to the public, they actually create conditions for, dare I say this overused word, jeopardizing democracy, even though we have a republic. Just saying. How do we deal with that, since they clearly are not committed to the truth?
It is frustrating. I know I haven't met Jay before, but I worked with Tony in the Army Reserve. I retired about 2 years ago, so I have most of my time in my 29 years was as a journalist, and I think the best thing to do is to not play nice, like Tony and David were referring to. I think one of the biggest problems is, like you said, the left gets away with all the crap they say, and the media says all kinds of crap they shouldn't be saying. It's false. But when you say a lie over and over and over again, as you know, people who don't use their brains actually start to believe that it's true, which brings me back to, you can't play nice with them. They're not going to play nice with us. And that's really one of the main reasons why they were so inflamed when Trump actually became president in 2016. They couldn't believe it. And he didn't play nice. He played their game the same way they played it. And they were incensed. It's like being, to me, it reminds me of being on the playground when you're a kid and all the bullies are pushing you around, and the kids who are pushed, they just kind of go over in a corner and they just play by themselves. Like, let's just ignore the bullies. Well, that doesn't help. And that one kid who gets pushed around, they push him back, and that's Trump, and he knows how to play their game. And I think the best thing to do is just keep speaking the truth and keep exposing what their lies for what they are. And the important thing is, when we are speaking truth, we have evidence to support it. Like David was saying, they don't know how to have an intelligent debate. I don't mind debating someone. If you have an opposing opinion, that's fine. Just give me evidence to support your claim. They can't do it. Even with my own son, I know I was telling Tony this before, they can't do it. My son, he's 36. He thinks he's so intelligent because he's paid all this money in a bachelor's, a master's. He has a second master's. And he refuses to have any kind of debates about AOC or anything on the Green New Deal, because he doesn't have evidence to support any of it. And so they just want to shut you down. But don't be afraid. You have to be bold. You have to be bold and just be up in their face the same way they're in your face. And eventually, I think more and more people will start to listen to us.
Well, I think that's the thing. So again, for the audience to remember, I do have a degree in environmental studies. I've studied it. It's a fraud. The way the left has portrayed it, there are environmental issues. We have to examine geologic time, the time that the Earth, for example, oxygen. Oxygen is a derivative of organic life. If we did not have organic life, we would not have oxygen. Oxygen is not something that happens naturally in the universe easily. And the fact that we have it, we are sustained by that. Nobody seems to pay attention to, because we do want CO2 to exist. CO2 actually is part of that biologic process, and it's plant food. The actual processes which have driven the planet to be habitable need to continue. And the very element of the target of the left, CO2, carbon, is the thing that actually has made the planet habitable. So literally, these people are so nuts, as David says, that they don't understand the very thing they're targeting are one of the key components which has made this planet as habitable as it is. And it is not endangering the planet. It's actually helping drive the processes which make it safe for us to live on. And I think it's interesting that the left is so bastardized this to make people believe that somehow a gas is the enemy of our existence. It's insane. So, Chris, over to you for a second. I did ask these questions of David, and I want you to comment too. So, I did quote Obama, and I want to ask you this question because you've been around a long time. What is the term when you hear someone say, "Our goal is a quote unquote more generous world"? What does that even mean? A more generous world.
It's a manipulative statement, and this is in the middle of what we call the rise of the pseudo-intellectual. Okay? Yeah. The emotionalist, if you will, the people who think they're smart because a piece of paper may tell them so, but they suffer from lack of quality education. It's no secret that America's grades in the youth grades in math and science have gone down over the last many decades, but their self-esteem has gone up. The number of touchy-feely, politically correct classes and lessons, including the new CRT-based lessons, go up, and the intellectual capacity goes down. But these people still seem to think they're very smart. Yeah. But having said that, when emotions and feelings matter more than intellectual capacity, when President Obama, the hero of the left, the pretty boy, says, we all must be more generous and we all must be more this or that, they follow up by saying, well, that seems and feels nice.
Right.
But then who's generous? Is it you, yourself? Is it the person? No, they're special. It's the taxpayers that are overly generous. Look what's going on with Ukraine. Right. The big joke, you heard Matt Gaetz was it last week or the week before? He was doing some tests. He was at a hearing saying, hold on a second. We have people who are worried about retirement. There are 75-year-olds working at grocery stores. Meanwhile, the U.S. is paying for Ukraine pensions.
Right.
More pensions in Ukraine. We can't keep doing that. It's hitting a critical mass. And I'm not saying it's the same exact thing, but we see it when it comes to the bank situation we have right now.
So, well, we'll get into that in a second, but let's continue the foundational discussion of where we're at. So, Chris, you're a 1980s music guy, right?
Yes.
You've got the
from my
you got the outfits. So there's a group called Shriekback. Are you familiar with that group, Shriekback?
My spine, my dear sir, is the bass line.
So one of their songs is Nemesis. I love that song, by the way. They've had kind of a resurgence recently, too. One of the lyrics in that song is this, and I'm going to quote it exactly. But you know, evil is an exact science of being carefully, correctly wrong.
Carefully, correctly.
Right. Huh. Now, let me read that again because I want the audience to internalize. This is an 80s song, right, Chris? I'm not lying about that, am I?
Yeah, it is. It's true.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, for those who don't know, you asked me the question, so.
And I got it. That sounds good.
Validation.
And the guy with the jacket is right.
Again.
I know very few things. So
that's right. So, but let me say it again because I want the audience to really internalize this. But you know, evil is an exact science of being carefully, correctly wrong. So, in other words, the Democrats are this, right? I mean, they are carefully and correctly wrong for purposes of upending society, right? I mean, am I missing something here?
No, but they're louder. They're
louder.
They're louder.
And they don't have good lyrics like this either, by the way. So just saying.
This is something that David Horowitz has not just come up with this year or in recent days. He's been touting this for over a decade, maybe even more than that.
30 years,
let's not wimp out, fight fire with fire. Tony, you do that. If anybody's seen Tony's Twitter fights, you have to follow Tony on Twitter, by the way.
Yes,
if you don't do that, it's at T _S_P_O_O_Y. I think I got it right.
At T Spooky, yes. And I get in a lot of trouble over there. I got my account back after trolling Ray Epps, just saying. But yes, but I think we all would agree then, and Jay, back to you then on this, that the left, the progressive left, is essentially trying to deconstruct the very society and the fabric of our country that has kept it together. Why is it that you and David are a few folks of the Jewish faith who've woken up? Most the folks in the Jewish faith seem to be completely committed to the progressive left. Why are you guys enlightened and everyone else is not?
Well, I hate to say it, I know you patted me on the back to start this off, so you.
Well, I always ask you the same question, and I always hope.
But I want to try to avoid patting myself on the back, and I don't want to get a cramp either. But, I hate to say it, and I know Norman Horowitz years ago said something like this, but there's a variation, which is basically that, and then G.K. Chesterton said it on the Christian side. Basically, if you give up religion, you don't go into an absence. You have to fill the space with something. The human being has to be impassioned, has to believe in something, has to be working for something. And so, if you, whether through a function of education or personal discovery, if the Jewish religion means something to you, and I'm not saying you have to be one particular way of being a Jew. There's a lot of ways of being a Jew. But if you study it, you have a relationship with it, and you feel it means something to you, then you're much less likely to buy into other fantasy conceptions of reality, because you feel grounded. You know where you're coming from. You know what your duties are. You know what you have pride in what your grandparents did and what the great scholars did. But if you all of a sudden, if you're a Jew, you're sitting stuck in the 21st century, and there's if you look at my shelves, there's books and books from Jewish scholars of all the ages, but it means nothing to you. All of that is gone. Maimonides.
But let me ask you.
So you're trapped in this little world. You're trying to fix it somehow. That much you retain. You're supposed to fix the world. You don't know how. So you drift into these wacky alternatives.
Yeah, but I know. But your culture, your people have come from Nazi Germany and were almost exterminated. That was the goal. And same way in the Soviet Union, where the Jews were not well loved. I'm just saying, it's the truth. I mean. Well, so I don't understand. No, let me finish the question. So, but then you all come here, and then that not you, but most of the folks in your faith embrace the very thing they walked away from.
Well, I want to share something with you, an experience I had just yesterday. This is not, it's a brand new experience, because as you know, I've written a book called "Bullet In from Sinai," which explains the biblical basis for the Second Amendment from a Jewish perspective.
Right.
And so yesterday I had a meeting with a fellow who runs a Jewish Second Amendment club. And he told me that his own grandmother, who's a Holocaust victim, it's hard for her to connect to his gun club, because when she was trapped under the floorboards with her life on the line, and the Nazi lieutenant was standing up there and talking to the people who owned the home, who were hiding her, and she could see through the floorboards the gun, the rifle was pointing down with the circle, and that circle seemed to her like just being dead. The butt of the not the butt. I'm sorry, the where the rifle shoots from. Right. And so, but that was so perfectly dramatized, because she is getting the wrong lesson from the story. Obviously, if evil people have the gun, then that's when you're in danger. When the good people have the gun, that's when you're safe. There's no vision of a world without the gun. Not yet. Maybe after the Messiah. But in the current iteration of the world, the good guys have to have the guns. Otherwise, the good guys are going down. So she experienced it, was traumatized by it, and the trauma actually scares her about the gun rather than making the connection. No, give the gun to the good guy.
Yep, that's right. I agree. Well, that is part of the solution. Yeah.
Speaking of good guys with the gun, though, it's time for Tony's Take, brought to you by Sig Sauer.
Sig Sauer, that's right. Today I'm featuring my Legion 220 carry, which is
that's lovely.
Yeah, it
is a nice piece.
A nice piece, yes. So I do carry Sig. This is one of my favorites. Like I said, the Sig 320 Legion carry. As you can see, the barrel is a little bit shorter, so you can pull it out more rapidly. So there you go. There's the gun for the day, just for everybody. All right, brought to you by Sig Sauer. Okay, Chris, what are my takes?
And as Sig Sauer brings you Tony's Take, here's take number one. Joe Biden patting himself on the back over new executive orders he wants out there. He has a phone, he has a pen, and with that, you don't have a Second Amendment.
So Joe, Beijing Joe, Lion Biden, I don't know what are we calling him today anyway.
Bubble-headed Biden.
Yeah.
Bubble-headed Biden. There we go.
Mr. Biden has decided that he's going to basically illegally attempt to use his executive authority to even further suppress the Second Amendment and the rights of individual citizens who have done nothing wrong. They're doing it across the board, as we know right now. The ATF is going after braces. I've got a brace on one of my weapons. It's for purposes of helping shoot the weapon more accurately. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything. It's a piece of plastic. And now he's trying to say that, quote unquote, universal background checks are now pretty much the required. So that's redundant because most places now require a background check if you purchase a weapon. It's no big deal. What they're trying to get at is generational weapon transfers. For example, my son and I have a gun trust, and we can exchange weapons. We have weapons in the trust. They want to make it so that I could not provide my son or to if we were like living as neighbors, theoretically, he'd want to stop me from being able to provide one of you a weapon. And it's like, as far as I'm concerned, I should be able to give you a weapon if I so choose. Why should I not do that? And that's the bottom line. I'm sure all three of you are not felons. I can go on the record on this moment and say I know none of you have committed a felony. Therefore, why should I have to do anything except here's the gun, or you can buy it from me. They're trying to infringe on a very basic right, which we need to be reminded is that we are the militia, and that's the other thing that people tend to forget. The reason that we're supposed to all be armed is because ultimately, if something happens to the United States, we all have to be the ones in service to the nation to defend it. And they wrote the Second Amendment with that in mind. And so Biden, every time he says, and he said he wants to get rid of assault weapons. Jay, back to you on this, because assault weapons come from the term Sturmgewehr. Sturmgewehr is the STG-44 that Adolf Hitler personally named. So I'm always fascinated by the fact that the left, to include Beijing Joe Biden, uses a term that was personally created by Adolf Hitler. Only the Democrats would be willing to adopt for their political purposes a name that Adolf Hitler came up with and uses routinely. Not that Hitler used it routinely, but Joe Biden does. Just saying. I mean, not that they're the same. Well, maybe they are, but it's not for me.
National Socialist
Party.
What do you expect? There you go.
Oh.
And keep in mind, though, and here's where I want the second part of your take on this.
Yes.
Joe Biden also patted himself on the back by strengthening, or his idea for strengthening, red flag laws. Now, we know that nobody wants a psychopath to hold a gun and start shooting it around.
That's
but
correct.
We've seen this. We saw it with the Google whistleblower. Red flag laws can be abused and will be abused, especially when power goes into the wrong hands. And I will contend that power's in the wrong hands now. And I don't trust these guys with a decision as to whether you are sane enough to hold a gun or not.
So I don't believe that the state should have the power to preemptively take your rights away. This was there's a thing called what was the thing? The movie with Tom Cruise, where they
Vanilla
basically,
Sky.
huh?
I'm kidding.
Top Gun? No, it's not Top Gun. It was the one with Future Crime, Minority Report.
A Minority Report.
Minority Report. And I encourage people to watch it. It's good sci-fi. I like Tom Cruise. I've never met the guy, but he seems like a nice enough guy. That makes good movies, obviously. And Minority Report is from, I think it's from a series of science fiction books that were done by the same person that did Blade Runner. Basically kind of looking at the dystopian futures of how technology and concepts can be bastardized and used inappropriately. So in this case, I think it's Philip K. Dick. Am I correct on that, Chris?
That I would not know. I'd have to look
anyway.
That one
So
up. Yes.
I think Philip K. Dick wrote the novelette for the Minority Report. Anyway, point being, when you watch it, it turns out that surprise, surprise, the system was corrupted, and they figured out a way to actually get someone who was innocent to be looking guilty as part of the process. So that's what worries me about red flag laws, is that the moment you give power to the state, especially Democrats who cannot be trusted with power, you have the potential for them to misuse that authority because you say something or do something they don't like. And therefore, all of a sudden, you're being accused of something you didn't do, or being, your weapons being removed because in your view, you did something crazy. And being crazy in their view is, oh my God, you support the Constitution. That's crazy. Oh my goodness, you're going against a woman's right to choose because you want to save the fetus. That's crazy. Their version of crazy is not our version of crazy, and that's what I'm serious. I mean, that's the thing we have to be concerned about, is that their definition of crazy is literally insanity. They anything that they push as sane is definitely insanity. What we believe is rational thought, they believe is something they need to attack, and that's what they're going to use red flag laws to do, is go after those who politically oppose them. Just saying.
Well, I think this shows you that a lot of things that start off innocent, you really have to oppose them when they come out.
Yeah.
Because the idea of the Baker Act essentially is that you can take someone's constitutional rights away for 72 hours and throw them into a place to be observed for mental health. And now you're just doing the same thing with the gun, essentially. So we made the mistake of not fighting the Baker Act.
Right. And
they're using the same structure, essentially.
Right.
We do have a few more minutes, and I need your take on this one. We all know that the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed.
That's right.
They had their hands in at quite a few different things, and we'll deal with that. But I want your take, because the media just jumped out. The apologists jumped out and blamed Donald Trump, which is definitely not true, considering what SVB has been doing and where they've been putting their money.
So first off, Barney Frank was on one of the failed institutions. I've been on the air with him a couple of times on Newsmax. Barney was part of the folks who wrote the new laws, the whole set of laws which were supposed to preclude another 2006, 2000. What was it? 2008, the disaster.
The Dodd-Frank bill. It was 2008. Yes.
And so much of the bank, as a matter of fact, the Silicon Valley Bank, only one person on that board was a banker. That's a red flag. It's like maybe if you're on a bank board, you want to have experience with banking. Maybe. I mean,
a little.
Maybe. I don't know. But I'm just saying that this was meant to happen. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump. It had everything to do with wokeisms and insanity of putting people who are more politically reliable as woke vanguards than they are competent technicians to understand how to run a bank.
I think they flushed a lot of money down the Green New Deal toilet.
They did, and trust me, it stinks to high heaven, because septic systems don't take new Green Deal dollars.
And now we've become antiseptic.
Oh.
So Jay, I do go back to Nazi Germany, in that so much of what's going on right now, this state control of banks and all this really does echo what's going on right now. You have so much government trying to influence control of banks, and
never let a good crisis go away.
It's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They love it when the government has tentacles, and they're waiting for a little weakness anywhere where they can grab another piece.
Right.
And that's how.
And so, Jay, don't grab anything, and don't let them grab you. You stay independent out there, right? And don't grab 28-year-olds either. We had that discussion the other day too, right? No 28-year-olds.
I'm unfortunately trapped, because I'm married to the most beautiful woman in the world. I can't really justify it to myself to go cheating on her.
Good for you. Congratulations.
That's right. That's right.
Mazel tov. All right, so that's it. We're wrapping it up. This has been another great program today of The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. I've been joined by my colleagues and friends, Jay Homnick, Chris Cordani, and Elizabeth Breckenkamp. We'll be back. Some of us will be back next week if nobody gets fired, just saying. And that includes me. I'm always on the chopping block. Who knows what might happen. So this has been The Hard Truth. We were powered by Sig Sauer, Never Settle. As I said, today was featuring my P320 compact 45, by the way, 45 caliber, great weapon, great round. And we are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud podcast network. Check us out, projectsentinel.net, londoncenter.org, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, and all the other social media sites that we're on. So again, thank you all for joining us today on The Hard Truth, and we'll be back very soon.
I woke up in a derelict delirium to a stranger's kiss and a broken opinion. With all my friends in a